All right, guys, I quickly wanted to go team by team here in the Big Ten. We've got the official 2023 schedules released. It's the exact same format as it normally is. We've got the rivalries as the last game of the regular season. We have the 3 crossover games. We have the 9 conference games. And then, of course, in 2024, it is still to be determined on how the Big Ten will handle that format. Will they remain with divisions? Will they go to pods? Will it be like the Big 12 where it's kind of a free-for-all? We're going to see what happens, but I just wanted to go team by team really quickly and kind of look who has an easy schedule, who has a hard schedule, just kind of sift through it. So Illinois football is definitely interesting, right? Nobody expected Illinois to be this good. They're currently the favorite to be the West representative in the Big Ten championship game, possibly facing Ohio State. They begin with Toledo. At Kansas is a fun little matchup. Penn State at home. Florida Atlantic, that's an easy win. At Purdue, Nebraska at Maryland. There's another crossover game. Wisconsin at Minnesota versus Indiana. There's another crossover game. At Iowa and versus Northwestern. So it's very hard to gauge Illinois on how they'll be next year just because they've had such a surprising year so far. But that's a pretty good setup when you've got crossover games, a home game versus Penn State, another crossover game versus Indiana at home and at Maryland. So that sets up nicely. Indiana, this is interesting. They begin at home versus Ohio State. If you guys remember, back in 2017, I want to say, Indiana started week 1 on a Thursday night against Ohio State. Now they begin on a Saturday at home against Ohio State. They get Indiana State. I believe that's an FCS team. They get Louisville. That'll be an interesting non-conference matchup. Neutral site game in Indianapolis. Akron at home. That's a free win. At Maryland. At Michigan. Back-to-back road games versus Rutgers, at Penn State versus Wisconsin. That's a tough stretch of their schedule. At Illinois, Michigan State, and then at Purdue. That is a pretty tough schedule just judging it from here. Iowa gets Utah State at home. They get their traditional rivalry. That's normally always week 2. They'll be on the road at Iowa State. That's always a low-scoring game. Western Michigan at home. At Penn State. Michigan State at home, Purdue at home, at Wisconsin, Minnesota at Northwestern, Rutgers, Illinois at Nebraska. That is a real easy finish. I don't think it'll matter because Iowa's offense dates back to the woolly mammoth, but that's a really nice end of the schedule. Those are, depending on how good Wisconsin's going to be. I don't know how good Wisconsin's going to be, but you get Minnesota at home, at Northwestern, home against Rutgers, home against Illinois, at Nebraska. That's a nice close for Iowa. Maryland starts with Towson at home. Charlotte, I think they had a home and home with Charlotte. Kind of a weird thing, but a home game with Charlotte. So that's a very easy non-conference. A home game versus Virginia. Maryland likely going to be, needing a new quarterback next year, so they'll need the easy games. At Michigan State, I think they lose that one. Versus Indiana. At Ohio State, that's tough. Versus Illinois at Northwestern. You get Penn State at home. So kind of a manageable schedule for Maryland. Seems like they have a hard game, an easy game, a hard game, an easy game, a hard game, an easy game. But I do think Maryland is going to take a step back next year, possibly without Tonga Vailoa. Michigan, they're doing the same thing that they did last year in terms of their non-conference schedule. So this is a new strategy for them here for these 2 years. They're scheduling no one. East Carolina at home. UNLV at home. Bowling Green at home. Horrible, just horrible. That is what they're doing. That's their strategy because of the 4-team playoff. They know they can't lose, and that's why I want the 4-team playoff gone, so teams will have more of a margin for error, so they'll schedule more kind of exotic non-conference matchups. Rutgers at home, so that's 4 straight easy wins. At Nebraska should be semi-easy. At Minnesota, we'll see with Minnesota needing a new quarterback next year. Indiana at home, at Michigan State, versus Purdue, at Penn State. So, this is a very manageable schedule for Michigan. 2 of their last 3 games at Penn State, and then you get Ohio State at home. That's probably the toughest stretch. And then the rivalry game, I don't know how good Michigan State's going to be next year. I'm sure they'll be better. Mel Tucker is going to be really aggressive in the transfer portal, I'm guessing. We will see. Speaking of Michigan State, they start with Central Michigan. Oh, they're not playing on a Friday. Michigan State always plays on a Friday against the MAC team to start the year. That's sad that tradition is ending. But they get Central Michigan, Richmond, Washington, so the home and home with Washington. This year they got crushed by Washington. They're going to try and get revenge on them. 4 straight home games. They get Maryland, at Iowa, at Rutgers. So you know what? Mel Tucker legitimately has a chance to go 5-1 to start the season. That's a very manageable start. Maybe go 5-1 into the Michigan game. Then you're at Minnesota versus Nebraska. At Ohio State, at Indiana versus Penn State. You know, that schedule sets up pretty nicely. I see they forgot the T in state for Penn State, but the schedule sets up pretty nicely for Michigan State, I would say. Very manageable. You could easily be 5-1 going into that Michigan game. You get Minnesota, that's winnable. Nebraska at home should be a win. At Ohio State is brutal, obviously. At Indiana is winnable. And then you get Penn State at home. Moving to Minnesota, they open on, I want to say this is a Thursday night on August 31st, so that's the Thursday night opener. It's Nebraska at home, so they'll be breaking in a new quarterback. Eastern Michigan, also at home. Here's one of the more intriguing non-conference matchups of the Big Ten. Minnesota at North Carolina. So we will see with that one. Maybe Drake May coming back. Or is Drake May eligible? I don't think Drake May is even eligible for the draft this year. So that's going to be a tough game for Minnesota. At Northwestern, Louisiana. That's a late non-conference game, September 30th. Louisiana's not a horrible group of 5 team. Michigan at home, at Iowa, Michigan State, Illinois, at Purdue. Okay, that is a rough schedule for Minnesota. That is the hardest schedule I've seen so far. Wow. That is a tough schedule pretty much throughout the entire thing. Nebraska opens at Minnesota, at Colorado. So back-to-back road games. They get 3 straight home games, Northern Illinois. Louisiana Tech visits Nebraska. They always seem to lose one of those type of games every year. This year it was Georgia Southern. They get Michigan at home, at Illinois, Northwestern at home, Purdue at home, at Michigan State, Maryland. That's a manageable schedule. At Wisconsin versus Iowa. So, Nebraska, it's impossible to predict. We don't even know who their head coach is going to be, but it does seem like a manageable schedule. Northwestern starts in conference at Rutgers. Then they get UTEP at home. They've got that home and home with Duke. They travel there. Then they get Minnesota, Penn State. They've got an October 7th game versus Howard. Then they get at Nebraska, Maryland, Iowa, at Wisconsin, Purdue, and Illinois. I don't know what to make of Northwestern football and what they're going to do with Pat Fitzgerald. Obviously, he's not fireable. I do think they're getting a new stadium in the coming years, so maybe they can revive their program with that. But right now, they're a dead-in-the-water program. It's very hard for them with the academics and stuff like that to recruit. Moving to Ohio State, so they do begin at Indiana, and I guess I would say my way too early prediction for this game is they will make this the big noon game. Of course, the context being Ohio State is breaking in a new quarterback, whether that's Devin Brown or Kyle McCord or whoever, they will be breaking in a new quarterback. Ohio State facing an FCS team. They face Youngstown State week 2. I'm guessing that's going to be a noon game on BTN. Western Kentucky, kind of a little zazzy matchup here. Should be a higher scoring game. The huge non-conference game at Notre Dame. That'll be a 7:30 game on NBC. Maryland at home. At Purdue, of course, Ohio State traveling to Purdue. You got to hope that's not a night game. Penn State at home on the 21st. Maybe this is a night game on ABC. Maybe we'll see. At Wisconsin. So that's 3 straight weeks. At Purdue, Penn State, at Wisconsin. That's a tough. We'll see how good Wisconsin is next year. But traveling on the road to Wisconsin is no joke. At Rutgers, Michigan State, Minnesota, both home games, and then you finish at Michigan. Penn State gets West Virginia at home. That'll be a huge game for the Big Ten. Penn State needs to win that game, breaking in a new superstar quarterback. Delaware at home, at Illinois. As long as Illinois, isn't nearly as good next year, this should be a really easy stretch. Penn State should go to Ohio State 6-0. I would be very surprised if they didn't go to Ohio State 6-0. They need to win all these games. Home game. Illinois should not be, this good next year. Home game versus Iowa. Northwestern's terrible. UMass is one of the worst teams in FBS. They're going to be 6-0 going to Ohio State and going to Columbus on October 21st. Then they get Indiana at home, at Maryland, Michigan. They've got a very nice schedule next year. It lines up. The only issue is you're traveling to Ohio State. That's the real only issue in that. Purdue begins with Fresno State at home, at Virginia Tech. So that'll be a big game for the Wow. Talk about a tough non-conference schedule. How about Syracuse, Virginia Tech, Fresno State? All right, that's a tough non-conference. You get Wisconsin, Illinois, at Iowa, Ohio State, at Nebraska, at Michigan, Minnesota, Northwestern, Illinois. So that's an easy finish, but that's a tough schedule for Purdue. Rutgers, Northwestern. They get Northwestern to start. Temple, Virginia Tech, at Michigan, week 4. Wagner, the FCS program, at Wisconsin, Michigan State, at Indiana, Ohio State. That's a brutal finish, man. At Iowa, at Penn State, Maryland. And then I believe, thankfully, this is the last team. Wisconsin gets Buffalo. They always face a MAC school. They get Buffalo, at Washington. So that'll be an interesting game. I believe Wisconsin faced Washington. I think that's Washington State. I think they have a home and home with Washington State. Yeah, it wouldn't make sense for Washington to face both Michigan State and Wisconsin. Georgia Southern, at Purdue, week 4. Rutgers and Iowa, at Illinois. So that's a nice schedule for them. Wow. Could Wisconsin run the table? Possibly. At Washington State might be tough. But it feels like they can easily beat Washington State. They could be undefeated going to that Ohio State game. That could be a top 5 matchup, maybe top 10 matchup. Maybe I'm being overambitious with my projections for Wisconsin football, but we will see. They get Ohio State, at Indiana, Northwestern, Nebraska. Oh my God, that's a great schedule. That is an easy schedule for Wisconsin. So just kind of my instant thoughts. Seems like Wisconsin has an easier schedule. Michigan. It also seems like Purdue has a really hard schedule just from my instant reaction to all these games. But guys, once again, the Big Ten releasing their 2023 schedule. It's the exact same format and as it's been in years previous. It's the 9 conference games. It's the 3 non-conference games. The 3 crossovers, East versus West, things like that. So guys, the same stuff. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.